Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the SQ webinar on digital transformation. My name is Rémy Bonnaffé. I'm one of the managers at SQ and responsible for our legal operations offering. And with me, I have Jack Shepard, working at iManage, responsible for business and strategic aspects of technology and innovation. He's joining us from the iManage offices in London, which, as you can see, has a ugly jumper, Christmas jumper day. So thanks for that, Jack. Today we'll be talking about digital transformation. Before we dive in, I first want to highlight some practical things. It's a one-way webinar, so your camera and microphone is not being captured, so you can just sit back and relax. There is on the bottom right, there are two buttons, which are quite important if you want to interact with us. There's a chat function where you can chat with every participant in the webinar, as well as a questions tab where you can ask Jack and myself questions. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. We'll look at the tab going forward in the webinar and pick interesting questions along the way. And finally, just also to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and that the recording will be sent out to all participants as well as people who couldn't make it. So let's start in. The first thing I want to highlight is what we will discuss. It's digital transformation. I like the term. I like it more than legal technology, for example. Why? Because it has not only digital but also transformation in the word. And I think the transformation aspect is really important, and it's what we're going to zoom in on today. The Jack and me will talk around 30 minutes on digital transformation, and we'll leave 30 minutes for Q&A. And we'll cover three topics, so around 10 minutes each. And the first topic I want to discuss is really the kicking off phase of a digital transformation project. And I would like to ask a question to you, Jack, because we know each other from Freshfields. We both worked at Freshfields, where we both worked within the innovation team responsible for digital transformation projects. Now you work at iManage, which is on the other side of the table. Let's say you work for a vendor. So I'm very curious to hear from your side what your go-to tips are for starting a digital transformation project.
I think the first thing I'd say is that the fact that you're like involved in a digital transformation project might indicate something about your personality that you should be a bit aware of. And I'm saying this just from personal experience because I got really excited about legal tech and stuff, and it reminds me a little bit of like children playing with Lego a little bit. It's like you've got like all these tools. It's really exciting, and you just want to get ahead and build something, get something out there, and all these like books like the Lean Startup and stuff. Kind of people often take those as kind of encouraging that kind of just play around, see what happens. I'll say something a bit controversial, but I actually don't think that is true, and I actually don't think that is the best way to start a digital transformation project. I think that if you too often people that leap in with the tech straight away just because it's the most exciting part and there's something in them, there's that childlike thing, I want to build Lego. The thing you have to do really, in my opinion, is work out what you're trying to achieve. And digital transformation is kind of, so what, who cares? There's got to be some sort of reason to it. And so when I'm talking to people about these projects, that's where I often start the conversation. It's like, what do you actually want to do here? Is this a profitability play? Is it something you're trying to do to make your workforce happier? Are you coming under pressure on fees? So for me, like that is the starting point on these kind of things rather than the tech itself.
Yeah, I fully agree. So focusing on the business requirements really is important. And I remember our time at Freshfields when we gave some coding classes to our fellow colleagues, which was a lot of fun. So I remember the geekiness part, and I cannot agree more with that. I think if you translate it to more practical things in terms of how to tackle digital transformation projects, I would give 3 recommendations. The first recommendation I would give is to organize workshops. I think it's a really important part of the trajectory, and it's one of the starting points in the trajectory. And what you're trying to do with a workshop is having an opportunity, a forum, uh, to go into discussion with all the relevant stakeholders and to discuss what the problems are and really zooming in on these problems. And I think that's really important. And another nice little feature about workshops as well is that it does take quite some time, and it's important to be upfront about that. But that's your first sort of validator as well for a transformation project, because you're going to embark on a longer journey. And if people are already struggling with finding 3 to 4 hours for participating in such a workshop, I think it already shows you that there's not enough of a burning platform, let's say, to tackle the issue that you want to tackle.
I've got a question for you, Remy, then.
Yeah.
So let's say you're in one of these like corporate legal teams, or you're in a law firm or whatever, and you actually can't find anyone to join a workshop. You know, everyone's just too busy. What do you do? Do you give up? Like, do you just be like, okay, well, people obviously don't care, we might as well not try? What do you do?
It's a tough question. I think it really prompts you to reassess why you started on this project, or why you're thinking of tackling a particular issue. Because if not enough users are willing to engage with you, I think it already says a lot about
Mm,
the issue. And then you have to look at, okay, who is the initiator about the project? Is it yourself? Might be triggered because you're seeing a fancy new tool,
mm,
and you want to implement it within the organization, but you see there's not really interest to go to try it out.
yeah.
Or is it being mandated by senior leadership, in which case it's important to have a discussion with them around, okay, is this really the priority we want to take on?
Mm.
Do you have tips? Have you encountered this already before?
I asked the question as I don't really have a very good answer to it. What I would say is that sometimes I try and organize a work. I've done workshops like that, and then someone said like sent me an email, and they're like the day before, and they're like, oh, I'm looking forward to the demo tomorrow or something like that. And I think the thing I would kind of highlight, and I think this is what you're saying, but the purpose of these workshops is really like, it's not about a showcase of technology. It's really about finding where you want to focus your efforts. Like, do you want to focus your efforts on a particular process in a particular practice group? This is a what I would refer to as like problem discovery. So, what problems exist in the organization to solve? And I think it's a really good tip from you. You've got to do those workshops because the problems come from your users. And what I would say is that far too often I find myself as a vendor engaging with like a project sponsor, whether it be like someone who's in a head of legal ops role or someone who's in a head of legal knowledge role, and they will think that they're speaking on behalf of the users, and they will say, everyone has this problem. You speak to the lawyers, you speak to the users, everyone will say the same thing. And often I find I haven't actually spoken to the lawyers, and it's their view, and therefore the whole project is kind of biased towards what they think. And I think your workshop idea is a good one because that removes those biases and actually makes you understand the reality of what's going on the ground, and that's the starting point for all this stuff, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important to note that it's not because it's a workshop, and you'll often hear the term design thinking and design working in a design way, user centricity, etc. It's not because it's a workshop that it cannot be rigid. And actually, I'll show an image which I think is quite important, and it's this one. It's what I really like to use as a framework within these workshops. It's called the problem solution canvas, and the key thing is to start with the problem. And I think it's important to leave some room in the workshop, let's say 30% to potential solutions, because they will come up eventually. People
Mhm.
just have the urge, especially lawyers, legal counsels, they have the urge to think in a problem solving way. So they will have the urge to propose solutions, but it's important to table those and really focus first 70% of the time on the problems. And so you map out who are you talking to? Who's the stakeholder? What tasks are they trying to do? Where is it going bad? What is working well? And then you have on the flip side, you have your value proposition where you start thinking about, okay, what can we introduce in terms of change, in terms of tools to help, to help bridge that gap. That's what I
This
really
is
like to
really
use.
cool. I've not seen this before. The other kind of, I think like this is really good because people probably thinking like, oh, workshop, but how do I actually practically do it? There's a book that I read a couple of years ago, which is I think it's called like Sprint. It's just called Sprint. It's like the Google Sprint methodology. If you Google the Google Sprint methodology, you'll find this book on it. And in my opinion, it takes it to an extreme. Like it recommends this process where you carve a whole week of someone's time out to do all of this stuff, which I think is just a ludicrous idea in the legal industry and will never work. But that's not to say there aren't some really good principles in there. So anyone wants to practically do that stuff, I'd recommend kind of looking at that book as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very good recommendation. I've read it as well, and it's a great book.
Quite
But
short,
also
but
sometimes take it with a grain of salt.
yeah, yeah.
We could be chatting about this all day, but I just want to move on with two practical things as well in terms of kicking off a transformation project. So we've talked about workshops as a really important element. Two other elements I believe that are key is involving your IT department. I've seen it quite a bit with clients that they want to embark on a journey sort of in their own department, and it depends of course of the organizational model, and some organizations have more freedom in terms of choosing what IT they use, some don't. But even if you have sort of the liberal model and you're quite free in terms of choosing your technology, it's still really important to involve IT. And finally, stakeholders interview, I think that's really key as well. Not only discuss your project at the outset with the people that will use the new tools or the new processes, but also the people that will consume it. So the internal business clients, for example, I think stakeholder interviews is also really important.
Yeah, good tips.
So we've discussed tackling the project. Of course, an important element that goes beyond tackling the project is going from A to Z in the project and concluding the entire project. Within that framework, I think change management is really important as well. Change management to me is facilitating change for the team. um, what do you see, Jack, in your day-to-day job and on clients you've helped with, what organizations should do and what organizations should try to avoid?
Yeah, so change management is, I'm really pleased to see it's had quite a lot of mention as a term, and some people watching this might have seen it on like social media and stuff. And I really hope it doesn't turn into like a buzzword, because this is serious stuff. Like what it means, as you say, is like, how can I get people from their current state into the new state? And again, like a mistake that I see a lot of people make is they hear this term change management and they think, oh, that sounds like something that a consultant has come up with to try and make a load of money, and sounds like it's a load of nonsense. You know, I often hear the attitude that if the tech is good enough, people will use it. Which I guess, like, if if the tech is bad, right, no one's going to use it. But like, the reason I don't agree with that whole if the tech is good, people use it thing is that, like, often I try an analogy. You can tell me if this works or not. All right. So imagine you've got like a coffee shop, like in some, like, that serves the best coffee in the world, but it's tucked around in the corner of some side street in Brussels, and no one walks past it. No one knows about it. You couldn't possibly tell that it's got the best coffee in the world, because you don't even know it exists. Why is it that everyone's going to the Starbucks and not this other coffee shop that has the best coffee in the world? And your problem really for that coffee shop analogy is actually getting people in the door, like getting people to come into the door and try your coffee. And it doesn't matter how good your coffee is. If no one is trying it, it's an absolutely irrelevant consideration. And that's the same thing for tech. Like, so your tech can be the best tech in the world. It can change people's lives. But if you are not getting people opening the tech in the first place, then it's completely irrelevant. I don't know if I've gone too extreme on that. Did that analogy make sense?
No, that analogy makes total sense, and it kind of also reminds me, and I have the graph as well to show, is sort of the adoption curve. Because even in the coffee analogy, you might have the hipsters coming in and finding the
Mm,
best coffee places and finding the best tools, and actually I think those hipsters are sort of the analogy of your early adapters. And I'm quickly going to share the graph because it's an important one to share as well. So this is sort of the classic graph you see often about the diffusion of innovation and technology adoption. So you would see your innovators and your early adopters when it comes to change management and introducing new tools. They will be your hipsters. They will be the people when, even if you are in a little street, they will come to you and they will give you feedback on your coffee, and they will drink your coffee and they'll come back. But the real trick in change management is convincing those other people, the early majority, the late majority, and bringing it back to the workshop. In the workshop, it's a great forum as well to start building and expanding your early adopters to the early majority. Find the champions, find the people that want to help you on the project, because a lot of people often in those workshops, they're quite happy to finally be able to vent some issues. They have the impression that their opinion matters. So it's a really great opportunity to move up this curve.
yeah. Maybe it's worth just bringing this into into like a live example. Like I'm just going to come up with one like out of thin air. Let's say you've got a problem with your lawyers printing loads of documents all the time. And I know that even post pandemic, this happens quite a lot where collaboration on documents is done by people writing on paper. It's rarer than it was once, but like you have, like, if you were trying to get people, if you're trying to instigate this change where you're trying to become completely paperless, you have to look at your curve you had there and start with those innovators and kind of think, right, let's see if I can find people who actively want to do this. And you can use those people for your workshops, right? Get those people in a workshop, maybe with some of the laggards, so that you can understand like their perspectives. And you can convert the whole thing from a paperless office project into something that's actually delivering value for people and solving their problems. So it might be, instead of paperless working, you're saying things like, oh, as a junior, you don't have to type in comments that someone sent you anymore that are on a handwritten piece of paper. Like as a senior, you can now work from anywhere. You don't have to take pieces of paper with you. Like as a senior, you have an audit trail of all of the changes that have ever been made to the document. So that workshop that you were talking about a minute ago is fundamentally crucial in developing an understanding of the problems you're solving. And if I could shout out for another really good book at this stage that we've talked about quite a lot before, it's called Building a Story Brand by a guy called Don Miller. And he really advocates this approach of in a market. It's really a marketing book, but for me, a lot of change management is about marketing. And what he advocates is, like, instead of saying, which is another mistake I hear a lot of people say, instead of sort of saying AI tools or blockchain tools or next generation cloud platform, talk in very clear terms about the problem you're solving for people and weave in like the emotional response they'll have when the problem's solved. So I think a lot of change management really is about understanding those things and phrasing them in a very clear way that resonates with people.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And for participants, maybe helpful to make a translation from the importance of change management to some practical tips. I have a few that I've applied in the projects we do, and that have shown to have a lot of success. I think the first one is determining your stakeholders. I already spoke about that earlier in terms of the workshop. So really think about the broad ecosystem of whatever you're trying to do, because usually you'll have the direct users, people within the legal team, for example, but then there might also be other stakeholders. The IT department is one. Maybe what you're trying to do is changing a process that relates to a finance work stream or approval of payments or things like that. So also talk to the finance people, see if they have some valuable input. And then finally, obviously, the end user of the solution, which will often be the internal client. So really determining your stakeholders is very key, keeping them front and center, and engaging with them, inviting them in the process as early as possible. Another thing I think is really important is communication. And I think that's often forgotten, and it's such a small effort, and it's normal because the people who are doing the digital transformation project, they're probably working on this day in day out, so they're in the weeds of things, but they often forget that they're so busy working on something that they forget to communicate about it. And just small little nuggets, we're working on this will be released then, is really important, and very helpful. And then two last things I think that are really important when you're doing change management is documentation. I think it's quite important to document what you're doing, create user manuals, capture frequently asked questions, for example, because questions will pop up, and it's great to be able to capture them, and obviously make your life easier as a person implementing it as well, because you can capture questions that come back. And finally, the most important part, maybe you'll want to jump in on that, Jack, as well, is creating feedback loops. Create as many feedback loops as possible. Get feedback, and don't just dump your solution at the end and then ask for feedback, but don't really have the opportunity to do something with the feedback. Make sure that you have feedback as early as possible in the process, so that you can iterate throughout the journey, really.
Yeah, and I think if you're having success stories on your projects, one thing I've found is that in a law firm or a corporate legal team, someone like me, I'm not a very convincing voice. The convincing voices are people's colleagues, and if you're getting somebody saying something good about a new tool, you should really use that testimonial they're giving, because that's going to be very convincing. I
Yeah.
just wanted to ask you a question, Rémy, because I noticed someone's asked on the chat about the cartoon with the cavemen,
Yeah.
and I wonder if you want to just bring that up again, because I don't know whether this is the right time, but it's a struggle, isn't it? Like the cartoon basically, yeah. If you bring it
Yeah,
up,
I'll show it.
yeah, I
Here
don't
we
know if you
go.
want to talk through how you react to this, because everyone has been in this situation before.
Yeah, it's also one of the first questions you asked. What do you do when you're trying to organize a workshop and no one has time for you? Sometimes it also boils down to this. Sometimes people are just so busy with their day-to-day job that they don't have to time to think about other things and the digital transformation project. So I have this cartoon always in my mind. I think it's a great cartoon. I'm happy this didn't happen, and that there were still people in that time that took the courage to try out round wheels. Um, to solve this, it's not easy. I'm not gonna lie. It's not easy. We see it a lot in the projects we do. I've seen it on past projects. The thing that I do to try to overcome this is, one, to break down projects as small as possible. Don't do a Phoenix project where you need so much time from the entire team that in the end it will not work. Try to start with low hanging fruit, minimal time effort. Also, something you've said in the past, Jack, is get as quickly to value as possible. So breaking down projects, and then finally, and of course, I am working at SQ, and we are helping our clients with these projects. It can also really help to outsource some aspects of this, because the reality is we see it every day with clients. No one has time to focus on these digital transformation projects. And you need to know that it's not only doing the project, but it's sometimes also um, maintaining the project later on, and getting external help on that can really help. And yeah, that's a nice way to go about it. I don't know how you look at this cartoon and how you solve this issue at iManage.
Yeah, I think I've got just one like really practical thing to say to this, which is that if you go and contact somebody like in the middle of the busiest part of their day and ask them if you can speak to them about change and innovation, they probably will say they're too busy. So a lot of this stuff actually is about context in which you're asking people. At Freshfields, like I was in part of. I mean, this is kind of unique to a big organization like that. But we had like football teams and stuff like that, like loads of social events. And I actually use those kind of settings as opportunities to ask people about this stuff. And I found it was much easier to get time with someone in like when they weren't at their desk in a slightly different setting. I've also found like training sessions to be quite helpful for that as well. Like if you're in a position where you're leading on a digital transformation thing, see if you can just get like 5-10 minutes in a room with people at their training lunch or whatever. That is you will find people be much more receptive there. Like someone will put their hand up and say, yeah, I'll give you 30 minutes of your time or whatever to speak. So that's my slightly more like sort of practical take on that cartoon.
Yeah,
I think the thing to recognize though that this stuff is not easy at all. It's so hard. Like and you've just got to keep hacking away at it. And like there will be someone in your organization, there'll be a group of people in your organization that do not like some aspect of what they do in their jobs. And in my experience, people, especially lawyers, they really like talking about themselves, first of all. Secondly, they like talking about their jobs. And third of all, often they quite like complaining about things. Like, so the difficulty for that cartoon is just getting that time in the diary and getting people to turn up to the invite. Once you've got that, I tend to find it's a bit easier, but it's just that initial hurdle you've got to get over.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more on this. I'm going to launch a poll. Let me go to the poll tab and publish the poll because I'm very curious to hear some answers from our attendants. So the questions is whether you within your organization have any digital transformation projects in the pipeline for the future. So please complete the poll, yes or no, and then we can look at the results.
It's good to see that the yeses are winning out so far, like especially at the
Absolutely.
time where maybe companies are being a bit careful about their costs and stuff. That it could be that many people are saying yes because they see maybe like transformation as something that can reduce costs and improve efficiency. That I wonder whether that's where the whole legal innovation thing is going to go. Actually, whether it ceases to be legal innovation and more legal efficiency. I wonder whether that's what might happen.
Yeah, very interesting. So we have 24 votes for yes and 9 votes for no. So there's obviously a lot of organizations thinking about introducing new projects, which is really nice. Jack, let's maybe turn to the last aspect. We've spoken a lot about change management, tackling digital transformation projects, more about the process side of things, the human element, but of course you can't hide the technology element of things. So what I would really like to hear from you is sort of the areas within technology or the application of technology that you see are showing a lot of value to in-house teams and lawyers. What do you see on the market?
See a couple of things. So first thing with in-house teams specifically, it's amazing the number of organizations I come across where people are still collaborating on very important files using like no system at all, like shared drives. I'm hearing a lot of people say, that is a prime example where they spend like 2 hours editing a document and they're editing the wrong version, for example, because like you can't really do versioning that well in a shared drive, and somebody just saves it down as like 5 separate documents and each one says that it's the final version. Like, so seeing a lot of people kind of like look at tech solutions, like whether it's something relatively lo-fi like Box or whether it's something a bit more substantial like iManage. Like a lot of people, like this is like an example of like a fundamental efficiency pain point that people will articulate if they're using a shared drive. And then of course you have the fun of actually getting people to stop working in a shared drive and start working in your new document management system. So that's quite a big thing. The second thing that I'm hearing quite a lot actually from there's a big like CLM bubble at the moment. Probably people joining this webinar have sort of heard that term before. It stands for contract lifecycle management. This year there's been a huge amount of buzz around it. I don't know if anyone wants to put any kind of their experiences of CLM projects they've done, but my own experience is that there's a very high level of dissatisfaction with CLM projects. So it'd be interesting to see whether that kind of improves. My kind of suspicion is that it's quite hype driven at the moment. So that's that. And the third thing I see actually is more and more people coming to me certainly with more of what I would describe as like a knowledge management use case. Generally from corporate legal, they don't use those terms, but they say stuff like, "Oh, we don't know where our templates are. We can't recycle memos we've received from external counsel. We've got like guides on how to negotiate a contract and playbooks and stuff, but people don't really use them. We don't know where they are." I'm hearing quite a lot of that from people. That's what I describe as a knowledge management case, use case. I don't know if that's kind of what you're hearing, Rémy, or whether I'm off in my own world there. You're on mute.
I'm on mute indeed. So it's exactly the three things that I see very frequently as well with clients and the projects we're working on. The first thing you said is about a shared document environment. It's amazing to me still to see so many clients working in shared folders where you can't co-author, where there's no metadata, there's no structure. People still work in sort of a tree structure, and you have to decide whether a document goes in this branch or in the other branch. And this is sad because there's so many technologies out there, and I think what you highlighted was really good. I think you have sophisticated document management systems like iManage, which then also has the ability to file emails, and you can really have a matter-centric sort of document filing system together with emails. But then I don't think you need to you need to per se go so far. I think you can already do a lot with SharePoint, for example. Moving everything to SharePoint. It's quite a familiar structure, so that's really a quick win as well. People already know somehow how Windows Explorer works and syncing documents. But the nice thing with SharePoint is you can incrementally start designing the database so that it works better for people. So you can use structured metadata to really more easily find documents back again. And only yesterday I had a feedback session going back to the importance of feedback about one of the projects we do, and we really do see that you can deliver great results and a lot of value by already using SharePoint. It's also often already onboarded within the IT team, so you won't have to go through painful approval flows with the IT team to onboard a new tool. So that's great. The second thing you said about CLM and contract lifecycle management, I agree with you. There is a lot of hype, although you shouldn't throw away the baby with the bathwater, let's say, because there are two things about contract lifecycle management that are really nice. The first one is legal is often sitting on a lot of value, so you can quite quickly show value to your internal clients. The second aspect that's nice around contract lifecycle management is that you also start to get more data about the documents you have. What's key, I think, with contract lifecycle management is start small, start with a subset of documents, something that's relatively easy. You could start with NDAs, for example. And the second part I would give as a recommendation, I think it's the reason why it often can fail, is also think about maintenance, because once you have a contract lifecycle management system, people will have to upload information linked to contracts. Who will do that? Think about that. Can you outsource it? Obviously, it's something that we look a lot at. So that's important, I believe.
I think on the thing that my belief around like the CLM stuff and the knowledge management stuff as well actually is that if you were just to read like some of the stuff that some of these vendors put out there, you might be led to believe that it's as simple as just like deploying a tool. And actually that's kind of like 10% of it. 90% of either a CLM or a knowledge management project is tidying up content. So for a CLM project, it might be like, where are my contracts? What are the characteristics of contracts I need to track? Who are the people that need to be able to see these things? Because often like legal is not the sole consumer of contracts. It might be sales teams or like HR teams as well. So it's back to what you're saying in the beginning, those workshops, the purpose of those is to understand those issues and understand like, how do you want to organize your data in a perfect world? What would a well-organized like contract system look like? What could you filter by? What could you sort by? All that kind of stuff. The same is true for knowledge management. So that's the 90% hard work, which doesn't really involve any technology.
Yeah, Yeah, and I'm actually seeing a great comment as well in the chat from Rosemi talking about legal leadership being involved, and I think it's about leadership being involved holistically. I think that's really important as well. You just spoke about workshop. We've been speaking a lot about the concept of a workshop at the outset of a digital transformation project, and I think it's also mentioned in the sprint book that you mentioned earlier. It's crucial to have leadership involved in the workshop.
Yeah,
Again, if they don't want to be involved, it's a huge red
right.
flag.
Yeah.
And there's often a huge discrepancy between what the leadership thinks and what sort of the new starter who just finished university or who just changed careers from a law firm to in-house thinks and works. There's a huge gap. So having them involved is really important. I don't know if you see that as well on the projects you're doing.
It's 100% crucial. I want to just put a couple of curveballs in there though, because I've been involved on a project where with a law firm partner, so like a senior leadership person who was really brought into the project. But the problem was that they were really engaging with it at a very low level of granularity. So they were sort of very much in the weeds on the solutions. They were talking about how things should be configured, how things should look, what things should do. And I think the trouble, the kind of double-edged sword thing here, when you do have someone who's strongly bought into a project, is you want to make sure that you keep those people at the problem area and the value area. They should be your guide on your North Star, on what you're trying to achieve and what the outcomes. You actually want to keep them a little bit further away than they might want to be on like the actual implementation detail, because otherwise they start micromanaging it. And your point with the new student or whatever is that the thing often I think legal leaders don't recognize is that the way that maybe they worked when they were in practice is not the way that users of the system work. Like everyone's different. And therefore, if you follow their advice too strongly on the solution aspects and the implementation, you could end up with a system that works very well for the leadership, but not very well for the people that actually end up using it. So I just want to throw that curveball in there. You've got to be really careful about how you manage those senior people.
I fully agree. And it goes back to the point that a workshop is not a playground. It's really a structured thing. And it's important that everyone voices their opinion, also leadership. But in the end, it's the team that will design and roll out and implement the digital transformation that need to take decisions. And when you look at methodologies like Scrum, you have a project owner and Jack, we both know this very well because we were product owners at Freshfields, and essentially it's having someone responsible for the end decisions, taking into account everything. But indeed, you shouldn't have end users decide what color the font should be, or really the tiny details of the solutions. Fully agree.
Yeah.
I see a couple of questions coming in. I see Alejandra asking questions about reviewing contracts, like Law Geek. It might be Law Geeks.
Geeks, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed. What's your opinion on that, Jack?
I mean, I'll give my answer here is like you've got to ask like, what does that software do for you? Like, have you identified somewhere in your business where you're losing money or employees are dissatisfied through some sort of shortfall in how you're reviewing contracts? Like, it could be, for example, that you're a corporate legal team that you're inundated maybe on a mass litigation thing with thousands and thousands of claim forms arriving every day. And it's a clear problem that you don't have the resource to review those. So that's an example of where you've identified the problem. And then the next stage is what's the solution to the problem? And something like Law Geeks, does that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of other tools on the market. What I would say is that when you go out to those vendors, try not to put together like a list of what your ideal feature set would be or what your ideal solution would be. Go to the vendor with what problem you want to solve and then work with your vendor collaboratively to solve that problem. That's something we do. I manage quite a lot. I know a lot of vendors will kind of be quite salesy and kind of like really push the hard sell through, but you've got to cope with those kind of vendors quite carefully and make sure they're directed to the problem rather than the risk of them selling you some tech that you don't actually need. That's the real thing that you've got to be careful of here.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot to say about this because it's something we are working a lot on at SQ. In addition to what we do around legal operations and legal operations consulting, we also have support around contracting, and we take on large volume of contract review work. So I would say zoom out of it. Why do you want to use technology to review certain contracts? What we often see is that there are certain contracts that can be outsourced, but then I would almost look at sort of a hybrid system where you have a human and machine review. I think those two forces joining together is often the best result.
Yeah.
But you also have to be realistic, and there's budget constraints, and it can be a very nice way to sort of already provide self-service to the business. We see it often happening, for example, around NDAs, where if you don't use tools like this, you're not really sure what the business is agreeing to, and you don't really have full details on the risk that the business might be incurring. So I think it's very promising, but it's very important to test out the tools, look at the use case, and don't use hope. Don't just hope that the technology will be the silver bullet, but use it in conjunction with a broader initiative to look at the entire work stream and maybe doing things differently, not just technology wise. That would be my takeaways.
I want to go, Rémy, to Charlotte's question
Yeah.
here. I think that our response to the last one was basically like, yes, that stuff can be good if it's solving a pain point or a problem for you. And Charlotte's question is, how do you find those initial pain points? Sorry, this is
Yeah, other
Charlotte.
question.
This is the other
Yeah.
Charlotte. How do you find those initial pain points to actually solve? She asks, do they come to you naturally via service desk tickets, or do you go out looking for them? And I think that you're right. What I would say is like all these, like this is my personal view. Might be controversial. My own personal view is that if corporate legal teams have like legal ops teams, or if law firms have innovation teams, it should be a responsibility of those people to go through all of the divisions of the company and engage with the users and understand how they are working. And this is something that I used to do in my previous role. So I used to literally go like, bringing up that caveman cartoon earlier, like I used to try and get some time in the diary with people and simply understand what they actually do for their job. Like, so I'd say like, who are they? How are they junior, senior? What division are they in? And I'd just say like, tell me what you're working on at the moment. And you can that's quite a general way of doing it. You could kind of, if you have a particular thing you want to focus on, like, so if it is contract review, you could go and find people that kind of are involved in that process, and you say, hey, I want to see like what you guys are doing on contract review. Could you just talk me through how it all works? And what you need to do when you're talking to that person is try and draw like a diagram of the actual steps that they're following, and try and get really granular. Like, lawyers are really bad at saying, oh yeah, no, it's sort of identifying risks. It's like, what actually does that mean? Like, what are you doing to identify the risk? What tools are you opening? What are you doing? Okay, you're scrolling down the document, like, show me, get them to show you how you do it. And the thing often is that you can't expect to go into a room and just have people tell you their top 10 pain points. Because if you do, they'll probably say like, oh, my computer's slow or something. It's your job as a professional here to take what people are saying and deduce what's painful for people. And the user might not be able to articulate it themselves, but this is where the genius of like all the guys at Apple and Steve Jobs fits in, because they have the innate ability to take what people are saying, read into it, and then like diagnose issues in their processes. So I think, Charlotte, yes, you've got to get people hunting and understanding how people are working. Things like service desks and service desk tickets are also really good data to indicate underlying problems. Again, it might not be what people are actually writing in the ticket. What they're writing might be a symptom of an underlying problem, and it's your job to go in and understand what that underlying symptom is. And I think doing it both ways, through the service desk tickets and other data, but also getting that anecdotal data and speaking to people.
But also to throw a curveball on that one, I think, and this is maybe also controversial, but it can also be dangerous to look for problems, especially if you're, because how you answer that question depends on who you are within the organization, within the team. Are you a legal counsel in a legal department? Then it will be much easier to be faced with certain problems. You will also often be in dialogue with colleagues, and finding issues will be easy. If you're sort of supporting the legal function, for example, it can be dangerous to try to look for issues, because you might find problems that they are not per se perceiving as problems. And you can debate whether it is a problem then, of course, and sometimes things aren't being done very well or very efficient, which is a problem. But you really need to be mindful that you need to tackle burning platform problems. So problems that are really painful. If it's a, they often make the comparison with 10x problems or 1x problems. If you have a problem and you can design a solution which makes it 10 times better, then you've really solved the problem. But if
Mm.
it only will be incremental, it's really difficult to do that. So also be careful to look for problems. You might find artificial problems, or problems that are not big enough. And answering that question really depends on where you are within the organization, because how I would approach things is very different. And one thing I've also seen very often in our projects, and I think it's still very sad, but in a way, lawyers and legal counsels sort of don't want to hear too much from non-legal people. And the first question is, oh, are you a lawyer, or are you a legal counsel? Did you study law? I think that's irrelevant. Unfortunately, that's still a reality, and it's better to recognize the reality, and being able to deal with that reality is also quite important as well.
Yeah.
I see another question for you, Jack, from Adam, about lawyers being risk averse.
Yeah. So the question is, how you've written about lawyers being risk of. Oh, here we go. We can display it on the screen. So it's basically like, your roles must be frustrating. How do you keep yourselves going? Like, it is hard, because I think, because I used to be a lawyer, and the thing that you used to do as a lawyer is, you go from one project to the next. You get a deal executed, and then you move on to the next, and you have that sort of feeling that you're accomplishing stuff. But I've had periods where, like, particularly when I was working in a law firm, where I've had like crisis of confidence, where I've been like, oh, am I actually doing anything here? Do people actually care about what I'm doing at all? And it's really hard, because you don't get those like moments, you don't get those milestones throughout the year where like deal executes or a project completes and you get 100% adoption. It just doesn't happen. It never happens. But what you do get is gradual shifts. And what I found is that I used to set myself targets on adoption. Like, I remember on the main project I was working on, I kind of initially set myself a target of like, okay, if I can get 50 users on this thing, like 50 active users every week, then I will consider this a success. But by the time I'd reached that goal, I'd kind of forgotten that I'd set that goal, and already my mind had shifted to like 200 users. So the thing I always try to do is like look back over time, because stuff is not, there are no fixed milestones, and you'll look back at time on the data you've achieved. But also, the other thing that's important is that we've talked a lot about mindset and attitude in this session. And if you're in one of these roles trying to drive digital transformation, changing mindsets and changing attitudes is a really, really big part of it. And sometimes it's easy to think that like everyone's just thinking the same way they were, but I can guarantee that if just like one person has like spent 30 minutes like venting to you about the problems they're having or whatever, and they feel like you're listening, that is going to cause a mindset change. It's something you should be proud of. So I would say it's a really good question. It's really tough, and sometimes there's a lack of that like immediate reward, but you've got to look back in time and kind of be confident that you are adding value at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think in order to do these kind of projects, and to work on these projects professionally, you started by saying, Jack, that you need to be, a lot of people are geeky or are interested in technology. I think that's true, but I think you also need to have sort of a hunger to solve problems. And for me, it's immensely satisfying to start projects where clients come to us and they face certain issues, And for me, it's just so much fun to look at these issues and start thinking about how they can be solved. And then it's, as you say, it's immensely gratifying once you've been able to roll out incremental changes, um, that you see that it's working and that there's a return.
Mm.
And tying it back to some things we've said earlier, that is also really important to break down bigger projects and smaller chunks, because you will have these feedback loops. You will have also personally, you will have the feeling that you're accomplishing something. So breaking up the project in smaller pieces is not only smart from a project management perspective, but also from a personal level. It gives you a sense that you're actually accomplishing something, that you're delivering value. And also always be open with your end users and say, look, if it's not working, tell me, because ultimately you don't want to work on things that are not popular, not being used. Yeah, really good question.
We should probably go to the other Charlotte's question now because we flashed that up earlier, but we
Yes,
didn't
right,
answer it.
right, right, right.
Do you want to? I mean, I'm happy to have a stab
Yes,
at this one, but
yeah, yeah.
um,
I,
like I think you'd answer it better than me, Rami. So I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I can't pop up the question anymore on the
So the
screen.
question is,
Yeah,
when we want to work on shared documents, we're currently using Teams. All our documents are saved on a server where it's not possible to work on the same document with multiple people. Would you say that SharePoint has more features and is easier to work with?
I I love this question. I think I've been preaching about SharePoint for quite some time now, and implemented it with some clients. SharePoint has had a bad rep, and you can't hide away from that. But Microsoft has done a lot to make the product much better. And I'm not saying it's a perfect product, but why I like SharePoint so much is because it's often already used. It's free because it comes with a package that almost all organizations have, Microsoft 365, and you can do quite some neat things with it. Um, I also see in the question that the statement is, yeah. Um, I also see uh, that there's a reference to Teams, and I think that's a dangerous one. A lot of IT teams, they push Teams because it's much sexier than SharePoint. But ultimately, if you use Teams out of the box, everything that's stored is in SharePoint. So it's
Hmm.
almost more of a branding thing. And in the question I hear, or I can read that the documents are saved in a server, which is not possible to work on the same document. And that leads me to believe that there's some custom configuration with Teams, and Teams is just sort of the interface, the front page, and that in the background the documents are stored elsewhere. So Charlotte, I would recommend to ask your IT team how the setup is done. And I'm not per se advocating that SharePoint is better. I really think, again, because you ask, is SharePoint better? Does it have more features? You need to look at your use case. If they're more detailed use cases, for example, if email filing is very important, if you want to do email filing, maybe go to a system like iManage, where that's coming out of the box. So it's important to look at what you need specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I wonder whether might be something weird going on, like if you're dragging and dropping a file into a Teams channel, rather than like sending a link to a document that's already in SharePoint. That might be a distinction. But Remy's right. There's a configuration I think that you can. So the capability you're talking about, like having people in the document at the same time, that's kind of referred to as co-authoring, and that I think can be turned off as a configuration thing, so that it's kind of like locked, locking people out of the document. So yeah, have a talk with your IT team, and Remy's also right. Work out what your use cases are for that, and be a bit careful with it, because I've had a few people on this where you turn co-authoring on, and then suddenly there's this whole host of people you didn't know about that really don't like co-authoring, and they kind of like don't want other people to be able to see the changes while they're making them. So just be a bit careful about that point as well.
Yeah, and maybe just to wrap up, because it's easy to talk in abstract terms around SharePoint, but just to highlight what we've specifically done for a client is we've created a database in SharePoint that mimics how they work, and the documents contain metadata that that are aligned with their sort of divisions and the countries they work with. So they can very easily say, show me a similar contract with a certain value in France for this division, and they can find it, or they can say, show me a contract for all these counterparties. So and those are things you can already do with SharePoint, which are already a lot of the requirements most people have about finding documents more easily. The only point to note is that it does require to manually input metadata. So again, you need to look at, is that a deal breaker? Is that not a deal breaker? There's some things to work around that. And those are sort of the things you would also discuss in workshops. And when you show sort of a minimum viable product of SharePoint, does it meet the requirements or not? I think we're running out of time, Jack. I don't want to keep people much longer than noon or 11 for your time. So we'll wrap up. I found this really interesting, Jack. I hope you did too, and I hope our participants did as well. We'll share our contact details through email. Maybe we can share them in the chat, Jack, if people want to follow up with questions. One shout out maybe for Jack is he has a great Twitter account. So if you're on Twitter, you should follow Jack because he's posting a lot of very nice things around change management. I'll type in my email address in the chat as well. If you want to reach out to us, please do. As you might have figured out, we're really geeks on this topic. So we are hard to stop to talk about these things.
Rémy and I are staying on this webinar to continue the
Yes, yes, yes.
so.
We do a marathon the whole day. So thanks very much, and finally as well, since we saw a lot of people tackling this project in the future, I wish you a lot of good luck on that. And if we can be of any help, do reach out. Thank you very much and
Thanks,
have a good day.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.